Hey folks, tonight we kick off with the oh-so-glamorous daily life of a group you probably never gave much thought to cavewomen. While the guys are busy chasing mammoths, arguing over whose spear is bigger, and trying not to tumble into a crevice, the cavewomen are handling everything else. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Always fun to see who's joining the party from around the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for some soothing white noise. Let's dive into tonight's adventure. You're a cavewoman, and it's dawn. Or at least you think it is. Because, spoiler alert, no sundials or wristwatches here. The only sign morning's arrived is a cold breeze sneaking into your armpit and the unmistakable feeling of a toddler foot rubbing against your cheek. You open your eyes to total darkness. Totally normal. The fire's gone out again, and nobody's getting up to fix it, especially not your partner, curled up by the smoldering embers like a lazy bear wrapped in a fur blanket. He doesn't even bother to catch any sun. When you stretch, something cracks. Could be your back, could be the floor. Either way, it hurts like heck. You slept on a bed made of dry grass, animal fur scraps, and any tiny bones the kids sneakily stuffed in last night. No pillow, just some vaguely soft rock that's slowly wrecking your neck. The cave's crowded. Next to you, two kids, a snoring adult, and a third kid gnawing on a stick they definitely grabbed outside. Somewhere far off, someone's kid is wailing like a prehistoric car alarm with attachment issues. You try to sit up without waking anyone. Spoiler, you fail. One kid pops up instantly, stammering that they're hungry. You grunt a reply that basically means, go lick a rock somewhere. They don't. Morning chaos kicks in. You check for strays. Gotta make sure the cave entrance isn't blocked by some giant, toothy beast. You hunt for your wrap. It's under the baby, who somehow is sleeping sideways and heavier than yesterday. No mornings are slow here. Once your feet hit the ground, you're responsible for fire, food, warmth, safety, and finding the naked kid sprinting toward the stream. Meanwhile, your partner rolls over, mutters some heroic nonsense about hunting later. Yep. Welcome to Stone Age mornings. You're not just awake, you're late. The fire humanity's greatest achievement, and your daily burden is in jeopardy. If you're a cavewoman, you're the firekeeper, whether you like it or not, because if that fire dies out overnight, guess who's hauling it back from the ashes like some prehistoric Prometheus with messy hair? Not your partner. He's still dreaming about mammoths he never caught. Nope. It's you, the one-eyed woman with a stick in hand. Starting the fire sounds epic in theory. In reality, it's just a bunch of squatting, grumbling, and whispering to damp wood. No flint, no matches, no lighters, just friction, dry grass, and laser focus fueled by the threat of your family losing their minds if breakfast gets cold. You squat by the pit, just a humble circle of charred stones and burnt regrets and rub sticks like it's magic. Sparks are rare and smoky. Your hands blister, knees ache, and a kid keeps whining why it's taking so long, like you haven't been doing this for 263 straight days. Finally, a thin wisp of smoke. You lean in, blow gently. Someone sneezes right behind you, nearly ruining the moment. But you hold steady. At last, a tiny precious flame flickers immediately threatened by a gust of wind, and your partner shifting weight like a rock in a fur cloak. Once the fire's up, the real job begins. You stack fuel, arrange stones for cooking, and try not to burn yourself on the same log for the third day straight. Meanwhile, your kids swarm around like moths to a flame, brandishing sticks and plotting chaos. Fire wasn't just for warmth. It boiled water, cooked food, scared off critters, and made your damp cave feel a little less like prison. And you had to babysit that fire all day, treating it like a pet with anger issues. If it rained, you cried. If someone kicked dirt into the fire, you called that straight up assault. And if the hunters came back empty-handed, guess what? You still needed fire to make soup out of sticks, because in your world, when the fire goes out, everything else does too. So yeah, you guarded it like your life depended on it. Spoiler alert, it did. The Stone Age was no chill breakfast time, no menus, no coffee, and definitely no one asking, how do you want your eggs? Mostly because there were no eggs to ask about. Last time, someone tried to snag eggs. What hatched had claws, hard pass. You're a cave mom. And the kids start whining about food. You hand them a handful of crushed seeds, and they look at you like you just ruined dinner. One kid asks, is there any meat you don't laugh? Maybe there's meat, if the fire fairy and hunting fairy both showed up that day. So now, you do what you always do. Go hunt for food. Basket woven from grass in one hand, baby strapped to your hip. You step into the wild. You're digging for roots, not chasing prey. Berries probably won't kill you. And if you're brave, a few larvae for protein. The tricky part about foraging nature doesn't think of it as a snack bar. Some berries are nutritious. Others are just poison, dressed up as dessert. You learned this the hard way. Like Cousin Thog, who hallucinated for 14 hours after munching on some spicy red berries. Eventually, you find enough to work with. Bitter roots, mushrooms you think are safe, and half-rotten fruit still good enough for breakfast if you slice off the bad parts. You return to the cave like a culinary peacekeeper. Prep is simple smash roots with a rock. Toss everything into a bowl. Stir with a stick. Your kitchen tools double as hunting gear, and your fridge is just a shady spot behind the cave, where ants haven't taken over yet. You warm the food over the fire, add some herbs, and hope it tastes better than it looks. Everyone eats with their hands. If someone finds a bug, you call it protein, just when you think you're done. Someone drops their bark bowl and asks for seconds. You sigh. No leftovers here, just hunger and another trip to the grocery store, aka the thorny patch by the creek. Welcome. Let me be clear, prehistoric kids were a hot mess. As a cave mom, you weren't just a mom, you were full-time bodyguard, doctor, therapist, cleaner, and snack distributor. No babysitters, daycare, or even basic amenities. You had dirt, a few animal pelts, and an awkward silence that usually meant a kid was plotting something very wrong. And you weren't raising one or two kids. Birth spacing. Forget about it. Kids showed up whenever they felt like it. Sadly, some didn't survive. The ones who did either clung to you like glue or ran straight for the nearest cliff with the boundless energy of someone who's never heard the word consequences. Your youngest is still nursing. The middle kid is trying to shove a lizard in their mouth. The oldest is missing, probably off chucking stones at a beehive again. You scan the horizon. No sign of him. Just... Meanwhile, you're trying to crush roots with a flat rock and the last shred of your patience. One arm wrangling a squirming kid. Your back permanently bent into an L from years of multitasking while hunched over. Toys. Try this stick and that rock. Entertainment. You are the entertainment. Every facial expression, every noise you make can be mimicked, giggled at, or emotionally crushed. And just when you really need to focus, like not burning dinner, one kid strolls right into the fire. poops in the food prep zone, or loudly asks about death. Discipline. You got two tools, your voice and your eyebrows. And if nothing works, you pull out the ancient parental threat passed down through generations. Put that down, or I swear, on the spirits, I'll throw you to the wolves. But somehow, you still love them. They're clingy, noisy, and biologically yours. And despite the prehistoric chaos, you know they're watching, learning survival in a world hell-bent on killing you every day. And that's your reward. Tiny humans surviving to wreck tomorrow's breakfast. Now, let's bust a myth wide open. Caves weren't exactly the prehistoric family peace and quiet zone. Think muddy pits, smoke-filled, damp, full of animal fur, kids, and that suspiciously awful stench. And as a woman living in a cave, you were expected to make life a bit more bearable. No brooms here. You cleaned floors by sweeping with a bundle of twigs tied together with animal funk and desperation. Did it work? Not really. The dirt just politely rearranged itself. Caves were where yesterday's ashes became tomorrow's dust, and anything that hit the floor was either lost forever or eaten by some wild beast you definitely didn't tame on purpose. Laundry. Yep, prehistoric women did that too. And by laundry, we mean hauling dried, blood-stiffened hides to an icy stream, beating them against rocks while hoping you don't get ambushed by a wild boar on the way. No soap, just sand, muscle power, and silent screams inside. So what about waste? Now that's a fun one. Prehistoric plumbing was called go somewhere else. Far enough from camp so you didn't smell it, but close enough so toddlers didn't become roadkill. If someone ignored this system, you had to lay down the law with hand gestures and maybe a stick, a plate, or, as it was known, bark licking and passing it around. Hygiene was a community affair, and clean basically meant no visible creepy crawlies. Of course, cleaning wasn't just about neatness. It was disease prevention, prehistoric style, no germ theory, but plenty of instinct and sharp observation. If your neighbor's hut started smelling funky and folks inside started dropping like flies, you probably moved your bedding 30 feet the other way and burned some herbs just in case. The worst part, nobody noticed your work until you didn't do it. Then suddenly, you're wondering, why is the sleeping spot full of animal poop? Or why does the water taste like squirrel stew? No thanks. You'd rather be on fire watch duty. Still, you scrub, sweep, and swat flies with the enthusiasm of someone who knows cleanliness isn't holiness. Almost never died from parasites. Dinner in the Stone Age wasn't a fun choice between pasta or stew. It was a frantic game of what can I cook before it spoils, runs away, or poisons someone. And if you were a cave woman, the answer was usually something barely edible if I dig deep enough. No pots, no pans, just fire, a flat rock, and the optimistic hope that this time your food won't fall into the coals. Most meals involved roasting, grilling, or holding something near the flame until it stopped twitching. Cooking skills, basic, stick meat on a spear, wave it near fire. Pray it doesn't taste like yesterday's regrets. You started by sorting through your meager stash. Maybe some meat from the last successful hunt, assuming flies, cousins, or hunting dogs hadn't technically claimed it first, but never leave empty-handed. No meat. Time to forage, tubers, roots, mushrooms you were only 70% sure wouldn't kill you. Spices luxury, flavor, choice texture somewhere between crunchy and chewy in all the wrong ways. While prepping food, you were constantly interrupted One kid insisted on helping by poking with a stick. Another cried because the mushroom looked like a frog. Your partner sat by the fire, sharpening a spear and offering gems like, "Don't burn it this time." You crushed roots with stones, peeled bark for flavor, and shoved leaves in places they weren't needed. Wrapping meat in big green leaves helped it cook evenly. A trick you invented after many meals turned into charcoal sculptures. Occasionally, you'd try boiling something in a stomach pouch, making the whole cave smell like soggy ambition. Presentation? Non-existent. Food served on bark plates, cut into chunks, or thrown straight into hungry hands. Everyone circled the fire like vultures starved all week. If they ate in silence, you called it a win. If someone covered their mouth, you just ignored it. If they asked for seconds, you laughed and said, "Go eat something else." Because, in your world, cooking wasn't a craft, it was survival. And if it was warm and chewable, you were a hero after a long morning hunting for food, wrangling kids, and nearly getting burned. You'd think a cave woman finally got a moment to herself. Nope. That's when survival skills really kicked in. Tribal hangouts, a complex dance of teamwork, chit-chat, and silent judgment that's shockingly practical. You gather with other women, not for fun, but to keep each other sane. Everyone sits in a loose circle, grinding seeds, sorting edible plants, untangling fur, and pretending not to notice whose kid just started eating mud. These moments are both therapy and strategy meetings. Nobody takes notes, yet somehow everyone remembers everything. Socializing is essential. These are the women who help you give birth, bury your dead, and pull you out of wolf trouble when you trip over a log. But let's not kid ourselves. There's also healthy competition. There's always someone with a better fire-starting method. Someone's tribe member supposedly snagged a wild boar solo. Another's toddler just learned not to lick beetles, making you suddenly feel like you're raising a tiny, potentially dangerous pet. You swap stuff, shells for berries, herbs for scraps of hide, while subtly judging the quality of everyone else's goods. That grass-woven basket way too tight, that patchy leather cloak. Yeah, you're not saying anything, but you're definitely remembering. Next time, bring your nicest gift basket. Conversation shifts from weather to childbirth, food shortages, and whose partner snores like a dying bear. You nod, smile, and grumble agreement. Sometimes, someone tells a hilarious story about a dude getting bitten on the butt by a goat, and everyone laughs, remembering that no matter how tough men act, goat-related disasters always catch up. There's a hierarchy here, even if no one officially declares it. Older women get mad respect. New moms get both support and criticism. You're floating somewhere in the middle, observant, capable, and tired. Because even if you don't rule the tribe, you remember who let their fire go out last week. In this world, that's social currency. In the Stone Age, medicine was less science and more winging it. Optimism and a surprising amount of bark. If you're prehistoric, congrats. You're the tribe's doctor, pharmacist, an unofficial counselor rolled into one. Paid in berries, no training, no textbooks. Your medical knowledge comes from watching what happens when someone rubs a weird plant on a wound and whether it heals or turns into a disaster forever. You learn by trial, error, and Thog's generous help. Thog used this leaf once and didn't immediately die. You start your day patching up little wounds, a scrape on a knee, A mysterious rash here. Someone's toe is turning an unusual color. You grab your herbal pouch, a mix of crushed, fragrant leaves, dried mushrooms, and at least one suspicious root that makes folks see weird stuff if you use too much. Bleeding, spider bites, sudden lack of will to gather seeds. You've got sap for that. It might sound desperate, but sometimes it works. The tribe respects your fixes mostly because the alternative is doing nothing and hoping the spirits nap in the afternoon. Your toolkit includes a sharp bone, a gut string thread, and a rock you swear is lucky. Stitches get done with fingers and sheer stubbornness. Disinfectant, just hot water and a glare. Anesthesia, you've got a handful of fermented berries and a long stick to bite on. You also handle childbirth, a painful ordeal of squatting, screaming, and praying the baby doesn't arrive during a thunderstorm. If all goes well, you're hailed as a miracle worker. If not, blame the moon. Through it all, you keep the calm confidence of a woman who's seen worse and probably still sports the scars to prove it. Not only do you survive, but you also heal folks without any fancy gadgets. With a neat 50% success rate in the modern world, you'd be totally clueless. But here, in your dusty, flea-infested historical corner, you're basically a legend. Just don't run out of bark. Now, let's talk fashion, or rather, a desperate attempt not to freeze to death in style. As a cave woman, your wardrobe isn't curated. It's slapped together from whatever recently kicked the bucket nearby. No closet, no mirror, and definitely no one asking if your fur came from an ethical source. Your everyday outfit? Animal skinned someone maybe you had the joy of skinning, scraping, and sun-drying while swatting away flies the size of walnuts, once soft enough not to slice your armpits. It's stitched up with bone needles and sinew. No zippers. No buttons, just rawhide ties and the occasional safety knot smack in the middle of your back, where you can't reach it. The end result. You're almost fully covered and warm. The fur itches. The leather's dry. And there's always some mysterious stain nobody wants to talk about. But hey, at least it blocks the wind and keeps the judgmental elder ladies at bay. Not bad. Right shoes, whatever you want, since shoemaking is a royal pain. Shoes are scraps of leather tied to your feet with strings that snap the second you step on mud or a hedgehog. Socks? Nope. Just cold feet and a healthy dose of humble pie. Accessories. Oh yeah, bone necklaces, shiny shells, or smooth stones. Not for looks. Mind you, these things mean something. That piece of amber found on a vision quest. The bear tooth from a bear someone else killed. But you're the loudest about it. You wear it with pride and a bit of flair. Hairstyles. Mostly practical. You braid, wrap, or tie your hair with a sharp stone because your kid thinks your head is the perfect climbing wall. Sometimes you add a feather just for flair. Fancy stuff. Occasionally, you spot someone with smudgy charcoal around their eyes or a red clay streak on their cheek and think, wow, she really tried today. Yep. Fashion existed back in the Stone Age. Functional, unique, and 100% biodegradable. And you're totally rocking the animal killed in the dark look. Old Stone Age romance? Not exactly candlelit dinners or long beach strolls. More like grumbling at each other across the fire, hoping no one steals your spot. Cave women's romantic prospects, let's just say, limited. The gene pool is tiny, and most men are your cousins or some mysterious distant relative. Flirting starts subtle. He brings you a particularly plump grub. You fake being impressed. He tosses pebbles near you at a gathering. You ignore him but don't walk away. Message is clear. I see you. I have rocks. Let's talk. Finally, he gets close, not with words, though. Nobody wastes fancy language on romance, except the gifted ones. Maybe it's meat, or a shiny stone. If he tries really hard, both are fine. You nod your acceptance. Now, you're officially a couple. The whole thing takes about 3 minutes, and no one looks each other in the eye the entire time. Love is practical. He hunts. You gather. He brags about the last wild boar he bagged. You point out you raised 3 kids on boiled roots and sheer stress. Mutual respect is built on grunts, firewood, and pretending not to notice each other's farts by the hearth. Affection shows in small ways. Sharing the dry side of the fur blanket, not stepping on your woven mat. Occasionally helping haul water without being asked. You've caught him shooing a predator away from your sleeping spot and felt something like butterflies. Or maybe it was just an unripe tuber. Of course, there's jealousy. Someone always tries to show off by carrying a bigger stick or lifting a deer carcass with one hand. But if flirting goes too far, you handle it with a glare and some public sarcasm. If that fails, a gentle rock toss usually does the trick. No poetry, no flowers, no love notes, mostly because writing hasn't been invented yet. But loyalty, shared warmth, and unspoken bonds form through mud, mammoths, and mutual exhaustion. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And sometimes he even lets you have the last bite of the cooked food. Now that's what I call romance. You wake up hoping today's just a chill day. Maybe a little snack hunting, a couple sibling squabbles, and no surprise injuries. Nope. Today, the wolves or bears are back on the menu. Or, if you're really lucky, your neighbor clan decides to drop by from the other side of the mountain. The ones who accidentally burn down your berry patch and claim it as their own. Living in a cave as a woman means you're not just a homemaker. You're also the part-time security guard. No spear for you. That's for the guys who only remember to use it after getting bitten. No. Your weapon is way more sophisticated, a pointy stick, a big rock, and the dead-eyed glare of someone annoyed while boiling roots. Wild animals don't care if you're busy. The leopard doesn't reschedule. Hyenas don't knock. They just show up, bare their teeth. Usually, when your hands are full of something squishy, you hear the noise, grab the nearest kid, and start yelling. Not because yelling helps, but because yelling is the only tool evolution gave you right now. Sometimes you scare them off. Sometimes they snatch a snack from your stash and vanish into the bushes like tiny bandits. And sometimes you just chuck a rock and hope it hits something important. That's called strategy. Then there are the neighbors. They don't attack with claws. They attack with stares so intense you feel judged. Passive-aggressive vibes, and accidental hunting. Maybe they're eyeing your cave. Maybe they want your water source. Maybe someone in your group hooked up with someone in theirs. And now, things are awkward. Whatever the reason, tension simmers like a giant stew gone bad. When it gets serious, everyone gathers. Not for diplomacy, for a group yelling contest. It's all about showing off, signaling, and comparing whose animal skin has fewer moth holes. Occasionally, someone throws a stick. Occasionally, someone bleeds. Then everyone goes home feeling victorious and slightly confused. Because the line between wild animals and neighbors is razor thin. Meanwhile, you stand in muddy dirt, clutching your kid and a stick, thinking, if one more thing tries to steal my dried berries today, I'm losing it. That's survival. That's vigilance. It's Tuesday. In a world where everything wants to kill you, weather, wildlife. Even that sketchy mushroom you thought was safe, making deals with invisible forces just makes sense. Welcome to Old Stone Age religion, a complex belief system built entirely on hope, fear, and lame excuses. As a cave-living woman, you gotta have some spiritual backup when you don't know why your cousin suddenly falls down and never gets up, or why the sun disappears every night. You need answers. No telescopes or germ theory here, so you arrive at the one logical conclusion: someone or something is pulling the strings. You and the other women gather around the fire, burning herbs that smell like burnt moss and old feet. You chant, hum, or grumble along, depending on your ambition level. Nobody's sure if the spirits are listening, but the smoke makes your eyes water, and that's close enough to divine presence. Then come the rituals. Someone's about to give birth. Time to smear some red ochre on the floor and whisper to a deer skull. Big hunt's coming. Better strip down and dance naked around the fire while pretending not to step on hot coals. One of the kids has a fever. Rub crushed leaves on their forehead and pray to the nearest rock that looks like a bird. These rituals aren't for show. They're serious business. Because in a world without medicine or weather forecasts, superstition is basically your user manual. Then there are the rock paintings. The original social media, fewer likes, more bison. You mix crushed minerals with spit, paint your fingers, and start recording your life. A handprint here, a mammoth there, a bunch of stick figures running from a bear. Abstract expressionism, survival edition. Sometimes you wonder who these paintings are for. The spirits. Future generations. Bored, muddy kids, doesn't matter. You paint because you have to. Every mark is a message: I was here. I fought. I fed my kid. I saw things that made me believe. It might not be theology in the fancy, official sense, but in your shadowy, fire-lit world, it's sacred enough. You're not used to it. But hey, you're about to get schooled. Back in the Stone Age, death was just part of the daily grind. It showed up regularly, in all forms: fever, falling off something, toothache, or just not waking up. And when death came knocking, it didn't ask permission or wait for the perfect moment. It crashed the party in the middle of a freezing night, during a hunt, or while someone was struggling to light a fire with soggy moss and misplaced confidence. As a cave-dwelling woman, you first feel it in your chest, a familiar knot tightening as crying fades into silence. The tribe moves slowly, by instinct, gathering around the body, not panicking, but with the resigned hush of folks who've been here before. No priests, no funeral homes, no slideshow memorials, just hands, stone tools, and knowledge passed down from your grandma. How to prepare the body, how to honor life, how to let go without falling apart. You clean them up, then wrap them tight. Sometimes you add a little flair, a shell necklace, a streak of red earth on the forehead, or a flower if you're lucky enough to find one. Not because it changes anything, but because it matters. It marks the difference between a corpse and someone loved. Burial depends on the terrain. If you're lucky, you find soft soil. If not, then rock. In the cold months, there's fire, a tiny flame, just enough for crackles and hisses while people whisper or sit in silence. Kids fidget. The elders stare into the flames like trying to remember the exact laugh of the one who's gone. Grief has no schedule. It lingers there, whispering in quiet moments. It steals your appetite and feeds you memories instead. That time, they brought you some weird fruit, or you tripped over a root and blamed the wind. But life goes on. You gather roots, patch your cloak, scold the kids because mammoths don't care if you're crying, and neither does the rain. But in the stillness of night, by the flickering fire, you whisper their names again, just to make sure the spirits hear you. And maybe, just maybe, the others do too. When the sun sets and the fire blazes, magic happens in the cave. Full bellies finally mean kids sit still. Long, dark, mysterious nights begin. Storytelling wasn't born from luxury, it was survival's desperate hack. Because if everyone's too busy soaking up a story, they won't freak out about being cold, hungry, or about to be dinner. As a cave woman, you earn your spot close to the fire. Maybe not center stage, that's reserved for the old-timers who've survived more winters than anyone, but close enough to squeeze in when someone forgets the part about the snake or the storm. Your voice blends with the noise of generations, weaving half-truths, real events, and a dash of drama to keep the kids awake. You tell tales of hunts that almost ended badly. But hey, whatever. About the woman who ran from a bear barefoot, 9 months pregnant. About the great river god who turned into a bird to warn the village of floods. Stories that entertain and teach survival lessons in disguise. Want the kids to stop wandering. Tell them about the cave ghost who snatches noisy children. Want the men to quit wasting arrows. Remind them of the fool who missed a mammoth and got peed on by a moose. The kids listen intently, eyes sparkling in the firelight. This is their school, their history class, and bedtime ritual. No books, no papers, just memory, rhythm, and acting skills sharper than a drill, bit powered by a single knee. Sometimes, stories turn into legends, a blazing fire, a weird dream, a shadow on the cave wall. Suddenly, someone becomes divine, a hero, or the reason stars move. And before you know it, those stories turn into truth, carved into bones, painted in ochre, whispered from mother to child. Because you don't just survive, you remember. You turn hardship into legend, names into echoes that outlast teeth, time, and the cold stone walls of your home. In the end, legacy isn't tools or animal pelts. It's the stories told in the dark. Ask an average person to imagine prehistoric women, and they picture a cartoon-furrowed brows, club in hand, leopard skin bikini, yelling like a banshee. A background character in history, decorative, rough, and not very bright. Maybe dragging the kid around while her mate invents the wheel and claims credit for making fire. But the truth, totally the opposite. Prehistoric women weren't helpless sidekicks. Nope. They were the backbone of the tribe doctors, hunters, shelter builders, child raisers, and memory keepers all rolled into one. They numbed toothaches with tree bark, fought hunger with creativity, and braved winter with just a hide, a shred of hope, and a freshly struck flint. No textbooks here. They were the textbooks. Everything their kids knew came straight from them. Stories, warnings, wisdom whispered around the fire. They didn't just survive, they quietly wreaked havoc. While some dude was busy failing to stab a rabbit for 3 hours, the cave women were whipping up dinner from roots, mushrooms, and maybe even that poor bird he stepped on 3 times. And beauty? Don't even get me started. Forget Instagram filters. These women wore sunshine on their skin, braided bones and shells into their hair, tattooed with soot, berries, and meaning. Their jewelry wasn't bought at the mall. They walked barefoot from riverbeds daily, one kid on their back, one arm hauling firewood. They've been misunderstood, because they left no monuments or armies, but they left everything else: worn tools from daily use, fingerprints in cave paint, burial sites where loved ones rested with care and ceremony. Their legacy isn't flashy, it's foundational, and that's kind of amazing. They did all this while bleeding every month, dodging predators, avoiding spoiled meat, and occasionally giving birth next to a smoldering mammoth dung pile. No applause, no trophies, just another day, another fire, another rock to scrape. So next time someone talks about cavemen, remember who tanned hides, sparked fires, and told the first bedtime stories while sharpening sticks. Spoiler alert, it wasn't some bearded hero. It was her, long before cannons roared or muskets fired, in a world where hunting was both necessity and spectacle. A strange bond formed between humans and a deadly beautiful bird. Falconry, the art of training birds of prey, wasn't just a medieval hobby. It was a ritual of patience, a status symbol, and a direct line to nature's raw hunting power. Falconry dates back thousands of years, maybe as early as 2000 BC in Mesopotamia or Mongolia. But by the Middle Ages, it was deeply rooted in European nobility, introduced through contact with the Islamic world, especially during the Crusades. Falconry added a weirdly sophisticated edge. European nobles didn't just see it as a pastime, it became a badge of distinction. Rocking a falcon ring on your wrist meant you weren't just rich, you were cultured. This wasn't farmer stuff. Birds were pricey, and training was brutal. And owning a falcon meant you had free time to babysit it. Laws even reflected this social divide. In some kingdoms, catching a hawk could mean harsh punishment. Birds themselves were ranked by social class. Emperors flaunted eagles and falcons. Knights could hunt with falcons. Priests, they were stuck with sparrows. Yep, even your bird had a social status. But falconry's appeal went way beyond power and rank. There was a weird closeness to it. Training a falcon required daily interaction, deep trust, and subtle communication. These birds weren't pets. They were apex predators who could bail any time. Falconers lived in constant negotiation, balancing dominance and partnership. By the 12th century, falconry manuals were written in Latin, French, and Arabic. These treatises covered diet, temperament, and the philosophical art of the chase. It wasn't just about killing a rabbit. It was about aesthetics, precision, and the thrill of watching nature turned into a weapon, just barely tamed. Basically, falconry was medieval performance art at its finest. It told the world you didn't just boss people around, you commanded the sky. Not all birds of prey are created equal, and medieval falconers knew that. Each species had its own temperament, skills, and social baggage. Picking the right bird wasn't just personal preference. It was a statement of status, wealth, and personality. At the top of the noble hierarchy stood the gerfalcon, huge, majestic, and famously impossible to own. They come from the Arctic and are as rare as your neighbor's Wi-Fi signal during a storm. Over there, these birds were gifts fit for emperors. In fact, back in the 12th century, the King of Norway sent falcons to the Holy Roman Emperor as a diplomatic peace offering. Owning one of these creatures was like having a medieval Ferrari, but imagine if that Ferrari could fly, kill rabbits, and occasionally bite your finger off. Next up, the peregrine falcon. Lightning fast and slick. A nightly favorite. Its dive can hit speeds over 200 meters per second. Basically, these are the sports cars of the sky, built for high-speed attacks that would make your morning commute look like a crawl. Their reliability and efficiency made them popular across all social classes well, at least among those who could afford the rental fee. The Sacker falcon also got plenty of love, especially in Eastern Europe and among crusaders who saw them in action across the Islamic world. The Sacker's bigger than the peregrine, but trickier to train. Then there are hawks, especially the goshawk and the sparrowhawk. Goshawks were the darlings of landowners and nobles, zooming through forests like missiles, grabbing hair and taking down big game with surprising power. Sparrowhawks smaller, temperamental, usually reserved for clergy or ladies, not because they're less fancy. Just old medieval ideas about which birds suit which gender. Yep, that's right. More medieval feelings than science. Training any of these birds? Definitely not for the impatient. Falcons don't just behave themselves naturally. They have to be mankled a slow, methodical process to get them used to humans. You start by keeping the bird in the dark, feeding it gently, petting it until it accepts you. Then comes the leg straps, hood, perch, and the endless repetition of the command, Jess. But once that bond forms, when the bird takes off from your glove, dives on a hopping rabbit, and returns with a bloody beak, it's no longer just an animal. It's a living weapon, and it answers to you. Behind every successful bird is a sleep-deprived, frequently scratched-up human, the falconer. These guys, sometimes gals, live a life of strict discipline, patience, and often bloodshed. Training a bird of prey isn't just a skill. It's a lifestyle. Falconry demands early mornings, constant vigilance, and near-total devotion to the bird. This isn't something you pick up between sword fights and bar brawls. Once you've got a falcon, it demands time, attention, and yes, even affection. These birds need feeding, daily weigh-ins, training, cleaning, and sometimes a lullaby. Sounds cuddly, right? Just remember, an untethered falcon can fly off the second you lift its hood. A whole year of training can vanish in one flapping heartbeat. Medieval falconers often lived on noble estates or royal households. A skilled falconer was a prized asset, sometimes rewarded with land or a fixed spot at court. Basically, a walking, talking treasure. Kings kept top-notch falconers on hand pros, not just caring for birds, but organizing hunts, training apprentices, and keeping the whole falconry scene classy. Because yes, falconry wasn't just for show. It was serious hunting business. A falconer's toolkit was a mini medieval weapons stash of weird stuff. Leather gloves were essential. Those claws will turn your wrist into ground beef. The hood kept birds calm when they weren't flying. Thin leather straps called Jess, tied to their legs, helped control them while perched. Then there's the lure, a piece of meat or a feathered toy, swung in circles to mimic prey and lure the hunting bird back. Yep, falconry had its own props, all maintained with millimeter precision. Don't forget the daily weigh-ins. Super important. Too heavy, the bird gets lazy. Too light, it can't fly. Falconers have to keep their birds in the just hungry enough zone, hungry enough to want to hunt, but not starving. A delicate hunger balance where they survive but don't freak out. In a world obsessed with hierarchy, these birds were the wild commanders. Feathered rocket bombs each time they hunted. Medieval life had social ranks for everything, even birds. Falconry wasn't just about hunting. It was a status symbol in the grand medieval social pyramid. Your rank decided which birds you got to fly. And heaven help you if you tried to punch above your weight. Medieval society had a secret falconry hierarchy, sometimes even public. It wasn't just culture, it was written into fancy laws. Like in England, these rules decided which bird fit which social class, making sure everyone stayed in their lane even when chasing birds in the fields. The emperor got to ride a falcon, the top dog of birds of prey, snow white, huge, and downright intimidating. Kings were handed peregrine falcons, or the gentler but still fancy Merlin falcons. Barons and knights could train falcons, or hawks. Noble ladies usually got Merlins, a small, speedy bird perfect for catching sparrows. Even priests and monks had their own hawks, usually the easier to handle kind. Farmers, nope, no falconry for you. If you were caught with a fancy bird you weren't supposed to have, that wasn't just a social faux pas. It could mean theft, or worse, stepping on noble toes. That falcon on your wrist could cost you fines, jail time, or even worse, depending on how cranky your local lord was. But falcons weren't just status symbols, they were living accessories, like a flashy watch screaming, "I don't have a real job." Walking around the castle grounds with a chill falcon perched on your gloved hand told everyone you had the cash, time, and brains to keep such a high-maintenance beast. Basically, it was noble bragging, plain and simple. Even the literature back then backed this up. Knights wooed ladies with falcon metaphors. Falcons stood for nobility, loyalty, and mastering the wild. If you could tame a falcon, surely you could tame your own passions, or better yet, rule a kingdom. So falconry wasn't just bird training. It was about reinforcing the world order with wings, claws, and a subtle message: I'm important enough to train death on a leash. When medieval nobles released falcons for a hunt, it wasn't just dinner time they were putting on a show. Falconry was sport, spectacle, and ritual, carefully choreographed to impress. This wasn't a solo stroll in the woods. It was a full-on social event with trumpets, entourages, and embroidered gloves. Picture it a bright morning, flags waving, nobles on horseback with velvet hoods hiding their falcons. Ladies in fancy dresses watched from under the trees as the hunt kicked off. Dogs barked, someone flushed out rabbits or quail, and the falconer tipped the bird's hood. In a blur of feathers and fury, the falcon shot up, then dove like a living arrow toward its prey. Everyone held their breath. The strike was fast and fierce. A rabbit thrashed under claws. A bird tumbled midair. The falcon returned sometimes to a lure, sometimes to the falconer's glove, and often to a warm little meat snack. There might even be applause, compliments exchanged, wine poured. But don't get it twisted. This wasn't just entertainment. The hunt was a political statement. Hosting a falconry expedition showed off your wealth, land, and connections. Guests included other nobles, foreign dignitaries, or bishops who liked to flaunt. To wow these folks, your birds had to be well trained, your hunt well rehearsed, and your prey dispatched cleanly. A clumsy falcon would make its owner look bad. Heaven forbid your bird missed the shot. And of course, everything had to be documented. Tapestries showed falcons in flight. Poets wrote odes to falcon dives and noble skill. Medieval friends sometimes mythologized falcons as symbols of sacred justice, striking from above, pure and swift. Plus, there was strategy. The hunt wasn't random. Falconers knew the terrain, the wind, and the timing. Some birds were trained for forest hunts, others for open fields. There were coordinated attacks, hawks driving birds skyward for falcons to chase. It was precision warfare, but gentler. At day's end, The amount of meat didn't really matter. What mattered was who was watching, how your bird flew, and how gracefully you could command death from above. Likes were real, and sometimes feathered and bloody, in a world where most sports were dudes swinging swords or jousting. Falconry was a weird exception. Noblewomen, queens, countesses, and nuns not only got to join in, they sometimes crushed it. In reality, a woman rocking a Merlin falcon symbol on her wrist was basically making a medieval fashion statement. Falconry was the rare combo of elegance, smarts, and practicality that attracted noble ladies. It didn't need brute strength or battle scars. Nope. It demanded patience, sharp observation, and a deep emotional bond with a wild animal. Skills quietly respected even in a guy-dominated society. The birds themselves were handpicked to match their falconers. The Merlin falcon small, fast, and nimble was the noblewoman's classic pick. Perfect for hunting little critters like sparrows or quail. Don't let its tiny size fool you. The Merlin packs a serious punch. A well-trained Merlin could fly faster and take down bigger birds, making it the darling of ladies-in-waiting and even princesses. Probably the most famous falcon-loving woman, Eleanor of Aquitaine, queen of both France and England, known for her brains, political savvy, and refusal to be sidelined. Eleanor supposedly kept and commanded her own flock. People also say her granddaughter, Blanche of Castile, was just as hooked on falconry. This wasn't some casual hobby, it was a power move. Even literature and art reflected this bond. Courtly love stories often showed falconry as a shared passion between lovers, with the bird symbolizing loyalty, devotion, or more boldly, tamed wildness. When a girl gifted a guy a falcon, it basically meant, I like you, but I'm also calling the shots. Falconry gave women chances to join social life, ride horses on hunts, chat up important men, and flaunt their skills. A woman who could handle a falcon was not to be underestimated. She had skill, calm, and a trained killer bird obeying her every command. You didn't mess with that. Of course, not every woman got to play. It was still a class thing. Peasant women might shoo birds off crops, but they weren't donning hoods for Merlins, yet among the elite. Falconry gave women a rare spotlight to shine and even steal the show. Behind the fancy hunting parties and embroidered gloves lay a world of meticulous, tough craft. Falconry wasn't just a posh pastime. It was medieval science built on close observation, endless trial and error, and shockingly sharp understanding of bird behavior. Falconers were some of the few medieval folks who actually studied animals. No fancy degrees, but they had a practical, near encyclopedic knowledge. They read a bird's mood from its tail feather twitches, spotted sickness in its sparkling eyes, and gauged wind direction just by licking fingers and checking grass. Training a falcon started with taming a slow, careful process that could take weeks or months. First, the bird was tied up in a dark room to dial down visual stimuli. The falconer would sit nearby for hours, whispering sweet nothings, hand-feeding it, slowly getting the bird used to humans. This wasn't some power trip. It was all about building trust. Push too hard, and the bird gets either scaredy cat or downright aggressive. Be too soft, and the bird never obeys. Once the falcon accepted the falconer, it met its gear a hood to keep calm, jesses for control, and a perch to mimic natural resting poses. Falconers carefully weighed their birds daily because, unlike medieval knights, falcons worked best a little hungry, too full, and they'd skip the chase, too skinny, and the bird might crash mid-hunt. Then came flight training. The bird was encouraged to hop short distances for food, gradually building up its flying range. Finally, it flew on a long, thin line, allowing high flights while still tethered. The last step, free flight. The falconer held their breath and prayed the bird came back. Surprisingly, medieval falconers even grasped basic nutrition science. They knew which meats kept birds light, but strong, usually freshly killed pigeon or rabbit, and recognized that spoiled meat could make their hunters sick or worse. Training a hawk starts by locking it in a dark room to chill its visual senses. The falconer then sits nearby for hours, whispering sweet nothings, hand-feeding the bird, and slowly getting it used to humans. Some folks even kept meticulous feeding logs on parchment. Sure, in a world where basic hygiene was optional, falconers were low-key early scientists relying on hardcore trial and error. One heartbeat, one feather, one dive all at once. Spend 5 minutes with a medieval falconer, and you'll swear you stumbled into a secret sky-worshipping cult. Falconry wasn't just about gear. And falconers back then, you'd think you'd walked into some secret society of sky fanatics. Falconry wasn't just tools and tricks. It had its own language, and not the kind you find in a beginner's dictionary. Falconry terms were as structured and precise as a monk's Latin. Screw up one word, and you instantly mark yourself as a clueless amateur, risking your noble host's public embarrassment. In medieval society, that was basically one step shy of treason. Let's start with the basics. A young hawk is called an eaz. A trained one is married. And if a hawk is molting, rumor has it they'd literally stitch it back together. When it poops a lot, and violently, that's called silence. A hungry hawk ready to hunt is, well, ready to hunt. And if it refuses to come back after a flight, congrats. You've got a missing Yarrick. Translation, don't count on getting it back. Then there's the gear. Jess is the leather strap tied to the hawk's leg. The Bewit tiny bells, yes. Bells on the ankle so you can track your feathered friend through the sky. Krantz is the long training line. The lure is swung in the air to tempt the hawk. And a good lure is actually a work of art: feathers, leather, meat, sometimes even ribbons all stitched into a deadly little puppet. And we haven't even gotten to the social niceties yet. There's an entire vocabulary just to say who can fly, which kind of bird. If someone tells you a man should fly like a goshawk, that's not random advice. That's social hierarchy disguised as bird talk. This dense dictionary isn't just about accuracy. It's a status flex. The better you speak falconry, the more you prove your pedigree, education, and worth. It's outdoor aristocrats' Latin, a secret handshake spoken out loud, even today. Many of these phrases slipped into modern English without most people noticing. Like being fed up with hawks so full they can't fly, basically. Getting played. That's what happens when you throw a hood over a bird's eyes. Like everything, medieval and noble, falconry eventually started fading away, not with a bang, but a slow, dignified bow out. The rise of gunpowder weapons and firearms at the end of the Middle Ages changed hunting forever. You no longer needed a year to train a hawk to catch a hare when a musket could drop it in seconds. Hawks, the ultimate noble predators, suddenly got old news. Falconry didn't vanish overnight. It clung to courts and ceremonial traditions like a stubborn relic. Some kings and queens kept hawks just for show. Others tried to preserve it as high art, like keeping antiques or suits of armor. But the truth is, simple time and tech moved on, and hawks couldn't compete with lead bullets and double-barreled convenience. Social shifts didn't help either, as medieval order gave way to the modern world. Rigid class structures that kept falconry alive started crumbling. Sacred rules about who could fly, what birds slowly blurred out, with urbanization and industrialization sweeping Europe. Forests full of deer and hawk-friendly meadows became rare, but falconry didn't die. Instead, it shifted east, especially to the Middle East and parts of Central Asia. It stayed deeply rooted in tradition, surviving as a cultural and even spiritual practice. In the West, falconry made a comeback in the 19th and 20th centuries as a sport for conservationists and hobbyists. From a medieval power play to a nature-loving, heritage-respecting gesture, these days, falconry is a global hobby. And in 2010, UNESCO even gave it the fancy title of Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity. Sure, it might not get you invited to tea with a duchess or boost your social clout anymore, but it still demands patience, respect, and know-how, just like the medieval falconers did centuries ago. That majestic falcon perched on your glove, it no longer screams political power, but it still faces the wind with that same old-school elegance. The bond between falconer and bird, built over hours of quiet trust, still proves one thing: the medieval folks nailed respect this wild nature. And it can be both your buddy and your conqueror. In 1137, under the crescent moon of the Abbasid dynasty, a boy named Isef ibn Aub was born in the fortress town of Trit along the Tigris River. Big chroniclers didn't bat an eye. No prophecies, no starry omens, just another kid born into a Kurdish military family, under the watchful eye of his governor dad. But this kid grew up to be Saladin, the medieval Muslim general everyone both feared and admired. Not just in the Muslim world, but even among his Christian enemies' courts. From the start, Saladin's world was a hot mess of chaos and ambition. The Muslim world was splintered. The Abbasid state in Baghdad, more of a figurehead these days. The Fatimid dynasty in Egypt was clutching onto its fading Shia rule, while the Levant looked like a chessboard of shaky little kingdoms and city-states. Meanwhile, the Christian Crusader kingdoms, backed by European knights and the Pope, were getting bolder, invading Muslim lands with alarming confidence. Saladin's early years weren't about books or divine visions, but cold, hard military pragmatism. His uncle, Shiru, a seasoned general serving the Zengid ruler, Nur ad-Din, took the young man under his wing, not out of love or favoritism. Mind you, just because the place was on fire and they needed every sword they could get. So, Isef learned not just swordplay, but politics, religion, and war. Quiet, observant, almost scholarly by nature. Nobody would have guessed this soft-spoken young man could lead an army, but Saladin had something rarer than charisma, strategic patience. He watched, waited, soaked it all in, and when the moment came, he struck with pinpoint precision. This was the era of giants. Saladin didn't yet hold the title of Sultan or fly his own flag, but the pieces were slowly falling into place. The journey from forgotten noble to commander of the faithful had begun. Born in the shadows of collapsing empires, he was born into the darkness of falling empires. But he would rise to unite them under one crescent, one sword, and a legacy that outlasted time. By mid-12th century, Egypt was a fractured land ruled by a weakening Fatimid dynasty, a struggling Shia dynasty barely holding on to order. Vacuum cleaners would have made conquest a breeze here. Both Christians and Muslim lords had their eyes on Cairo. Shiru, Saladin's uncle, dove headfirst into this chaos on orders from Nur ad-Din, the Sunni ruler of Aleppo and Damascus. Saladin came along as the loyal nephew. Not yet the boss, but Egypt was the real test. The Fatimid court was a hotbed of plotting, bribery, and backstabbing, the masterminds of conspiracies, lurking crusader envoys, and a jailer who was more figurehead than ruler. Shiru played the game ruthlessly, fighting enemies outside and schemes inside. Silent observer, Saladin watched his uncle tear apart Cairo's political web with one hand on his sword, the other full of gold. In 1169, Shiru suddenly died. Some say from overeating, others whisper poison. Just like that, Egypt's strongest army was leaderless, maybe out of desperation, maybe politics. The Fatimid court made Saladin their new vizier. That should have been a death sentence. Young, foreign, Sunni in a Shia court where enemies outnumbered friends. But this was the world's first glimpse of Saladin the politician. Instead of torching rivals with sword and fire, he moved with grace and caution. He kept the Fatimid regime afloat, kept famous officials in place, and slowly, methodically built loyalty among Egypt's divided elites. Meanwhile, he was quietly transforming Egypt from the inside out. He bankrolled Sunni Madras, kicked out the key military officers, and steered Egypt down Nur ad-Din's Sunni path. And when Fatimid Caliph al-Adid died in 1171, Saladin didn't bother crowning himself sultan. Nope. He just showed up on Friday prayers, read from the Abbasid cleric's playbook, and basically told the Muslim world, Egypt's back in the Sunni club. Bold move. No bloodshed, pure genius. When Nur ad-Din died in 1174, Saladin wasn't just the vizier anymore. He was the de facto boss of Egypt, raking in the wealth, commanding the army, and holding a prime spot in the Islamic world. The general found his battlefield. The diplomat found his throne, with Egypt firmly in his grip. Saladin turned his gaze eastward toward Syria, Damascus, and the legacy of the late Nur ad-Din. When Nur ad-Din kicked the bucket in 1174, his lands got sliced and diced. His heir was just a kid, surrounded like a snack for vultures. Syria, where Saladin cut his teeth, suddenly looked like low-hanging fruit, ripe for unification. But Saladin wasn't sultan yet. Sure, he had Egypt, but claiming Syria, that wasn't a done deal. He had rivals, haters, and old allies now calling him a usurper. He had to play it cool act, like he wasn't power-hungry, but still grab the bull by the horns when the chance popped up. True to Saladin's style, he moved with calculated restraint. First step walk into Damascus, not as a conquering army, but as the protector of Nur ad-Din's kid. Everyone rolled out the welcome mat. He paid debts, cut taxes, and focused on continuity over conquest. His takeover felt more like coming home than an invasion. Other cities, not so chill. Aleppo put up a fight, and plenty of rebellious rulers clung to the broken Syria dream. Saladin fought, negotiated deals, and even showed mercy while most people were itching for revenge. It wasn't just about blood. It was about legitimacy. He needed people to actually want him to rule. Between 1174 and 1183, Saladin played one heck of a military chess game. He held on to Homs, Hama, and even faced off against some seriously deadly assassins. Yup, the Hashashin tried to kill him twice. He survived both attempts, and even made peace with their mysterious leader at Alamut. Even his enemies admitted Saladin had become too scary to kill and too righteous to ignore. When he took Aleppo in 1183, Saladin wasn't just a military leader anymore. He was the guy who united Islamic lands from the Nile all the way to the Euphrates. His power wasn't inherited, it was earned through diplomacy, persistence, and above all, a patient commitment to restoring Islamic unity against the Crusader threat. Now, he had land, people, and religious street cred. The Holy War against the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem wasn't just talk anymore. It was a plan. And the man leading the parade wasn't wearing a crown, but the whole Islamic world knew his name. By the early 1180s, Saladin was more than just a regional powerhouse. He was becoming a symbol to the fractured Muslims across the Middle East. He was the unifier to his enemies in the Crusader states. He was becoming something way scarier than a brutal army. He was a strategic mastermind on a mission. His power now stretched across Egypt, Syria, and northern Mesopotamia. He held the political capital, religious legitimacy, and military muscle to launch a war many thought inevitable. Since Jerusalem fell in 1099, the Crusades had been ongoing. But Saladin didn't rush in. He wasn't reckless. He waited, built alliances, secured supply lines, and made sure that when the time came, his campaign wouldn't just be a series of hit-and-run raids. It would be a full-on holy war with a clear goal, not chaos disguised as piety. But not everyone could keep their cool. The Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, under the hothead Reynald of Chatillon, kept poking the bear. Reynald attacked Muslim caravans, broke treaties, and even threatened to invade Mecca, a red line no Muslim leader could ignore. Saladin answered not with anger, but with steely resolve. By 1187, he'd gathered the biggest army he'd ever commanded. He pulled troops from across the Islamic world: Turks, Kurds, Arabs, Berbers, even volunteers from as far away as Persia. This wasn't just a fight. It was a holy cause, and Saladin made sure his soldiers knew it. The man was pretty careful, framing this whole conflict as a moral crusade. His war wasn't against all Christians, just the ones dirtying the doctrine, breaking treaties, and disrespecting Islam's sacred spots. Even in his holy war proclamation, he kept it solemn. This wasn't revenge, folks. It was justice. By now, both sides knew the showdown was coming. Skirmishes ramped up. Crusader outposts crumbled one by one. And on the horizon stood Jerusalem, the crown jewel of Christian presence in the Holy Land. But first, Saladin had to face his enemy head-on. He wasn't some reckless warlord. He was a lion with a long memory and the patience of a chess grandmaster who'd finally lined up his pieces. The waiting game was over. Summer of 1187. The Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem was cocky, divided, and led by idiots. Their king, Guy of Lusignan, was still wishy-washy, and Reynald of Chatillon, the drama king behind endless conflicts, kept stirring the pot by attacking Muslim caravans. When Reynald hit a rich trade convoy headed for Damascus, breaking a fragile ceasefire, Saladin had had enough. He sent Reynald a message: "I swear by God, I will kill you with my own hands." And he meant it. What followed wasn't a raid. It was an all-out campaign. Saladin rallied over 30,000 troops, and, in July 1187, lured the Crusaders out of their fortress comfort zones. The bait, the city of Tiberias, strategically perched near the Sea of Galilee and home to Count Raymond's wife. The Crusader soldiers marched out to rescue it. Despite being short on water and roasting under the brutal Levantine sun, exactly what Saladin wanted. He'd picked the battlefield carefully: the Horns of Hattin, 2 rocky hills with dry grass and 0 fresh water. His forces surrounded the Crusaders, cut off their supplies, and burned the fields. Trapped in the heat, choking on smoke, and dehydrated beyond human limits, the Christian army started to fall apart. Saladin's troops attacked hard and without mercy. Archers rained arrows like a deadly storm, cavalry smashed through Crusader lines. By day's end, Jerusalem's once mighty army was crushed. Thousands were captured, including King Guy himself, and Saladin kept his promise. He personally executed the king, but spared him out of courtesy, not weakness. He treated many captured knights with respect, even releasing some for ransom. That's Saladin for you, brutal yet politically savvy. The true cross, the sacred relic of the Crusader army, was seized and paraded through Damascus as a trophy of divine justice. The Muslim world cheered, while European Christians were left shell-shocked. This was more than a military defeat. It was a blow to morale and legend. The Battle of Hattin didn't just crush the Crusader army. It flung open Jerusalem's gates. After that smashing win at Hattin, Saladin moved fast. Castle after castle fell to his forces. Acre, Nablus, Jaffa, Beirut. Ascalon either surrendered or got swept away. The once powerful Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem was crumbling. Only one major city stood: Jerusalem. For Muslims, this wasn't just a strategic prize. It was Islam's third holiest city, lost nearly a century before in the First Crusade. Jerusalem's fall in 1099 was marked by such brutal massacres the streets ran knee-deep in blood. Saladin's goal was crystal clear. He would retake the city, but wouldn't repeat those horrors. In September 1187, Saladin's army laid siege to Jerusalem. Inside, the defense was led by Balian of Ibelin, one of the last competent Frankish lords. Knowing they had zero chance militarily, Balian negotiated. He begged Saladin to spare the city's residents, and Saladin agreed, but with conditions. Instead of a bloodbath, he offered safe passage in exchange for ransom. Christians had to pay to leave, and those who couldn't were freed thanks to donations from Saladin and his commanders. Some were ransomed, others released immediately. No looting, no vandalism. Churches untouched. Even the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was respected and protected. On October 2nd, 1187, Jerusalem was handed back to the Muslims after exactly 88 years of Crusader occupation. Saladin marched in, not as some butcher, but as a liberator. First stop, Al-Aqsa Mosque. He cleans house there and orders the restoration of Islamic holy sites. The golden dome of the rock shines again, not just as a political flex, but as a spiritual mic drop. News of Jerusalem's fall shook Europe like a bad hangover. Rumor has it the Pope actually died of a heart attack upon hearing the news. The Crusader kingdoms panicked hard, but even Christian chroniclers grudgingly praised Saladin's mercy, comparing it favorably to their ancestors' brutal antics a century earlier. In one campaign, Saladin pulled off what no Muslim leader had since the Crusades began. He retook Jerusalem with style and restraint, boosting his rep not just in Islamic history, but among his enemies too. Jerusalem's fall in 1187 hit the Christian world like a thunderclap. European kings weren't just mad, they were straight up humiliated. This wasn't some distant outpost lost. This was the holy city, the pilgrimage hotspot for Christians. Now, under Muslim rule, Pope Gregory VIII didn't waste time. He dropped the Alita Tremendi papal bull, calling for a new crusade, and this time, forget small-time lords or pious volunteers. The kings were coming. Big reaction? Indeed. England's Richard the Lionheart, France's Philip II, and the Holy Roman Empire's Frederick Barbarossa all sported their crosses, called the Third Crusade. This was all about revenge, glory, and redemption. Right in the middle was Saladin, facing the full might of European Christendom. He prepped for war, fortifying coastal forts, securing trade routes, and stocking up his troops. He knew what was coming. These weren't your average knights. They had massive treasuries, elite soldiers, and battle-hardened generals. In 1190, Barbarossa drowned en route to Anatolia, and his army fell apart without him. But Richard and Philip pressed on, landing in the Levant and capturing Acre in 1191 after a brutal siege. Saladin tried to break the siege, but had to pull back as sickness and attrition gutted his forces. Losing Acre was a huge blow. But Saladin wasn't about to fold. He kept harassing the Crusaders with hit-and-run tactics, dodging direct fights while wearing them down. Still, the Crusaders kept pushing forward at the Battle of Arsuf. Richard snagged a tactical win, and Saladin got a first-hand look at the English king's firepower. But despite all the back and forth, neither side could land the knockout punch. Jerusalem stayed under Saladin's control, but Richard lacked the troops or political guts to mount an assault. Eventually, these two heavyweights struck a deal. In 1192, the Treaty of Jaffa was signed. Jerusalem remained Muslim, but Christian pilgrims got safe passage to their holy sites. No one scored a total win here, just a peace forged between two warriors who actually respected each other. Saladin held his ground, not just with his sword, but with diplomacy and dignity. By the end of the Third Crusade, Saladin wasn't just a military boss. He was a legend, admired by both friends and foes alike. Even in an era drenched in religious fanaticism and brutal wars, Saladin stood out for his honor, restraint, and knightly swagger. Western chroniclers, awkward as they were admitting it, couldn't help but respect him. Legend has it, Saladin sent doctors and cold water to Richard the Lionheart when he fell ill. When Richard's horse was killed in battle, Saladin reportedly sent him 2 fresh mounts, saying a king shouldn't fight on foot, true or not. These stories built Saladin's myth as a brave but fair warrior who respected his enemies even in victory. But his generosity wasn't just for kings. After battles, he often freed prisoners who couldn't pay ransom. He protected Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, letting priests and pilgrims keep their rituals going, even under Muslim rule. While many leaders cling to power by scaring the heck out of people, Saladin inspired folks with his personality, not a weakness, but a calculated power move. His mercy was political capital, letting him take cities and tribes without a drop of blood spilled. And for many Muslims, his actions weren't just smart politics, it was Islamic virtue in action. He embodied justice, humility, and mercy as laid out in the Quran. Jihad wasn't mindless destruction to him. It was a noble struggle to uphold faith and order. Meanwhile, Saladin lived modestly. Despite ruling vast lands and massive wealth, he was known to sleep on mats, eat simple food, and dress plainly. When he died, no personal fortune was left behind, no castles stuffed with gold, no overflowing treasuries. His estate barely covered funeral costs. That mix of humility and military genius turned him into a legend. To Muslims, he was the ideal holy warrior. To Christians, a formidable enemy with a storied history. A rare figure who balanced power with principles, politics with piety, war with wisdom. Saladin wasn't just a conqueror, he revolutionized how conquests were remembered. By 1193, the war had quieted down. Jerusalem stayed in Muslim hands, and peace, fragile but real, held over the Holy Land. The Crusaders didn't retake their holy city, but they won access to it. Saladin, tired but dignified, returned to Damascus. His warriors had aged. His body was frail, and his soul heavy from years of fighting, diplomacy, and leadership. But even legends have to bow out. In March of that year, Saladin fell ill with a fever at 55. No dramatic final battle. No assassin's dagger, just a slow, quiet fade away in a small room in Damascus. The man who once commanded an empire now lay in a humble room, surrounded not by jewels or slaves, but by family, scribes, and doctors. When he died, it turned out he left almost no legacy behind. Though he ruled some of the richest Muslim lands, Saladin gave nearly everything away to charity, soldiers, the poor, and scholars. His funeral was paid for on credit. In an era of greed and showboating, that's almost unimaginable. His body was buried near the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, where his modest tomb still stands today. Humble, quiet, unguarded. Visitors included kings, presidents, and even Emperor Wilhelm II, who was so moved by Saladin's legacy, he offered to fund a new marble tomb. The locals said nope. Simplicity was the whole point. Saladin's death left a void. His sons lacked his vision, and the empire quickly fell apart. But his fame lived on, not through dynasty, but through storytelling. Europe remembered him not with hatred, but respect. Dante put him in the first circle of hell, not with murderers or tyrants, but among virtuous pagans. In the West, he was a paradox, a Muslim warrior, fighting Christians, but living Christian ideals better than many Crusader knights. In the Muslim world, Saladin became the model of a just leader, a blueprint politicians, preachers, and poets still admire today. His life wasn't just about grabbing power. It was a masterclass in wielding power with purpose. Saladin's sword was sheathed for the last time in 1193, but his name, that never faded. In medieval Europe, the church set life's rhythm from birth, marriage, death, and even joy. One of the strictest seasons was Lent, 40 days of fasting and penance leading up to Easter. For medieval Christians, Lent meant giving up rich foods like meat, milk, and eggs, plus embracing austerity, prayer, and self-sacrifice. But before this gloomy season kicked off, something wild happened. A raucous, wild, sometimes downright ridiculous festival called Carnival. The masquerade was the last hurrah. One last binge before weeks of sacrifice. Chaos was okay here, where the usual rules got flipped upside down. Everyone ate and danced like there was no tomorrow, stuffing themselves with all the foods Lent forbids. Meat, cheese, butter, eggs, basically a buffet of sin. Nothing was safe at this party. But it wasn't just about the food. The masquerade was the moment when social order took a vacation. Peasants mocked their lords. Fools paraded around like kings. And revelers in masks roamed the streets, dressed up to blur the line between human and beast, saint and sinner. The usual hierarchy vanished in a haze of booze, music, and laughter. This festival wasn't just fun and games. It was society's ritual cleanse, a symbolic flip designed to remind everyone that the world's a mess and order is pretty fragile. By granting a brief period of role reversals and freedom, medieval communities believed they could chase away evil and corruption before diving into serious, pious Lent. Carnival was also a theatrical spectacle. Parades featured bizarre masks, caricatures of clergy and nobles, and performances mocking religious and political authorities. People joined in with pranks, street antics, and sometimes ritual battles. sometimes with real blood. The church tolerated, even encouraged this madness, seeing it as a necessary purge before the spiritual reboot Lent promised, promising stuff. So before fasting, before repentance, before the bleak, cold days of Lent, medieval towns exploded with color, noise, and chaos. It was a brief rebellion against restraint, a celebration of human folly and sin, a last taste of earthly pleasures before the soul's tough diet began. Carnival's roots go way deeper than the medieval church calendar. It's tied to ancient traditions, pagan festivals, and humanity's urge to party before winter ends. Long before Christianity spread across Europe, people marked seasonal shifts with wild festivals honoring fertility, warding off evil, and welcoming the sun's rebirth. When Christianity arrived, it didn't erase these festivals, but absorbed and transformed them. The church cleverly timed the festival right before Lent, turning a lavish pagan party into a Christian ritual. The name carnival probably comes from Latin carnum levare, meaning bye-bye meat, a clear sign that the good times were over and the strict meat-free season was about to begin. Throughout medieval Europe, masquerades carried strong local flavors and customs. In Italy, Venice's famous masked balls created a mysterious vibe so legendary it's still talked about. In Germany and Switzerland, elaborate parades and colorful costumes celebrated the departure of winter's spirit. In France, masked dances and costumes of wild men mocked power and social norms. Despite regional differences, one theme stayed: constant social order on pause. Peasants could pretend to be nobles. Fools ruled the streets. The poor mocked the rich without fear of punishment. It's surprising the church allowed this role reversal. But it served a social purpose. It acted like a pressure valve for society, releasing tensions that might otherwise explode into riots or chaos. Carnival also had a dark side, in many places. Raunchy jokes and even permitted violence were part of the fun. Masks hid identities, letting people say and do things banned for the rest of the year. Sexual innuendos, heavy drinking, public disorder not only tolerated but expected by the Middle Ages. Masquerades became pre-Lent rituals with huge popular appeal. It was a time when everyone from all social classes, rich, poor, noble, peasant, came together to feast and act out fantasies before the long season of Lent repentance. One standout feature of medieval festivals was the mystery and madness of masks and costumes. For weeks, folks prepared elaborate disguises, turning into animals, devils, saints, and folklore characters. These masks weren't just decoration. They were transformative tools, letting wearers shed their everyday identities and step into a wild, free world. Masks gave anonymity, a magical invisibility, breaking down social barriers. A peasant could become a lord, a wife could mock her husband, and even clergy could be ridiculed without fear of revenge. This role reversal is the secret sauce behind Carnival's power. The usual rigid hierarchy of feudal society temporarily tossed out the window. Costumes ran the gamut, from downright bizarre to outright weird. People rocked cloaks jingling with bells, sported giant animal heads, or painted their faces in outrageously unnatural colors. In some towns, wild men paraded the streets wearing outfits made from leaves, animal skins, and feathers, basically Mother Nature's chaos incarnate. These wild images were a vivid reminder of the untamed beast lurking just beneath civilization's polished surface. The masquerade was equal parts performance and party. Parades hit town squares with dancers, musicians, and actors mocking everything and everyone. Sometimes they even crowned a full king, often a lowly priest or peasant, who got to publicly roast his superiors for a day. This drama wasn't just for kicks. It was deeply symbolic. Masks and role reversals let medieval folks face their fears, frustrations, and desires in a way society would actually tolerate by mocking power and embracing madness. They reminded themselves that authority and order were pretty fragile constructs. But the church had a complicated love-hate relationship with these festivities. Officially, the church recognized the masquerade as the kickoff to Lent, but it kept a wary eye on the chaos. Some clergy condemned the vulgarity and warned that such wildness could send souls straight off the rails. But here's the real deal. Carnival was a cultural pressure valve, a necessary release so society didn't blow itself up. Behind those wild masks and hoarse laughter, medieval Europe found a temporary escape, a place where the world's rules bent until Ash Wednesday showed up. The most famous part of Carnival, the ultimate feast, one last wild blowout before the strict Lenten fast. For 40 days, Christians had to give up rich foods like meat, milk, eggs, and butter, but during Carnival, all those forbidden foods piled up. Tables groaned under the weight, and everyone ate until they couldn't anymore. It wasn't just about stuffing faces. It was a ritual. Medieval cooks and bakers whipped up special treats just for this occasion. Meat and egg pies, rich sweet cakes, and spiced wine were everywhere. In some regions, communities threw huge feasts in the town square, inviting both the poor and the rich to share in the bounty. One iconic dish was the king cake, a sweet pastry hiding a tiny figurine or bean inside. Whoever found it got crowned king or queen of the festival. A hilarious way to flip social roles during the party. This tradition still lives on in places like New Orleans and parts of Europe. Alcohol played the starring role. Medieval wine, beer, and mead were often spiced to cover up rough flavors and pack a punch. Partygoers drank themselves silly, danced, and sang all night long. Taverns overflowed, and local officials struggled sometimes successfully, sometimes not so much to control the chaos. Food and drink weren't just for fun. They prepped the body and soul for Lent by breaking the rules before fasting. Medieval Christians believed they could cleanse themselves of sin and weakness. The lavish feasting symbolized shedding worldly worries to focus on spiritual renewal, but excess often got out of hand. Chronicles from the time described drunken brawls, public indecency, and riots with a mix of fascination and horror. Nobles sometimes joined the mayhem, disguising themselves to mingle with commoners and blur social lines. Despite the wildness, Carnival was a community event, a shared experience that brought people together. It was a reminder that even in a world ruled by faith and discipline, human desire for pleasure and connection was unstoppable. When plates were cleared and cups drained, partygoers knew the feast was ending, and serious fasting and repentance were about to kick in. It's weird how the medieval church both condemned and celebrated Carnival with the same fiery passion. On one hand, it was a wild, noisy bash full of drinking, bawdy jokes, and mocking the authorities, including the clergy themselves. On the flip side, the Masquerade Festival was an essential part of the Christian calendar, a last hurrah for earthly pleasures before the sober season of Lent. The church's attitude complicated and super practical. People got that the festival played a big social role by letting folks blow off steam and confess their sins in a controlled way. It kept things from boiling over into full-blown chaos or rebellion all year long. The festival acted like a pressure valve, where everyone could let loose under the watchful eye of the church. Of course, clergy often joined in the fun, though with some rules attached in many towns. Low-ranking priests were crowned king of fools and allowed to act ridiculous for a day. This topsy-turvy role reversal was a humble nod to God, admitting that no one, not even the church hierarchy, was immune to madness and sin. But don't get too wild. Church authorities tried to keep the festival in check with edicts against excessive violence, blasphemy, and sexual debauchery. They feared the festival might corrupt souls instead of prepping them for Lent. Some bishops even condemned masked dances and body games as devil's temptations. Despite the warnings, people's wild spirits were hard to tame. The church often found itself walking a tightrope between control and indulgence, sometimes approving the festivals, sometimes condemning them, but rarely stopping them altogether. Theologically, masquerades were seen as a sort of vicarious penance. The sins committed during the festival were considered temporary and forgivable, cleansed by the Lenten fast. It was an acknowledgement that humans are flawed and prone to excess, but God's mercy and repentance restore balance. At its core, Carnival embodied the paradox of medieval Christianity, a religion demanding strict discipline but rooted in forgiveness and human imperfection. The Church's reluctant acceptance of masquerades showed that spiritual renewal sometimes needs a little chaos first. One of medieval Europe's most infamous traditions was the Festival of Fools, a day when regular social order flipped upside down and the world looked downright chaotic. This party wasn't just about food and drink. It was a full-on festival of mockery, satire, and role reversal. During the Festival of Fools, the Church's lowest members, clerics, choir boys, and minor officials were bumped up to fake positions of power. They might get crowned bishop or even pope for the day, conducting parody religious ceremonies. These fools gave absurd sermons, sang ridiculous songs, and performed nonsensical plays mocking the very institutions they served. The message was crystal clear: no one escapes satire, and humility is a virtue even for the powerful. But this wasn't just clerical mischief. The Festival of Fools let the whole community join in on social satire. Peasants dressed as nobles, townsfolk mocked their rulers, and elaborate costumes poked fun at everything from clergy to monarchy. At a time when telling the truth to those in power could be deadly, the masquerade created a brief window where criticism wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged. This celebration of reversal had deep psychological and social functions. It let people vent frustrations about daily struggles and rigid hierarchies. For one day, the powerless could laugh at the powerful, and the powerful could see themselves reflected in exaggerated humor. It was a social pressure release that acknowledged inequality without letting it explode into rebellion. Still, the Festival of Fools was controversial. Church authorities often viewed it with suspicion or hostility, condemning the disrespect and chaos it encouraged. In some places, the festival was banned or canceled, especially as the Renaissance and Reformation brought new religious ideas. But its spirit lived on in other European festival customs and later celebrations. The Festival of Fools reminds us medieval society wasn't as rigid or miserable as it's often painted. Even in the darkest times, people found ways to laugh at themselves and their rulers, a tradition that lives on in modern satire and political comedy. Masquerade festivals were both sensory explosions and social upheavals. Medieval European streets, squares, and markets came alive with music, dancing, and spectacular sights, turning ordinary spots into stages for wild celebrations. Musicians played a big role in setting the vibe at Carnival. Drummers, violinists, flutists, and horn players performed everywhere from graveyards to taverns, inviting everyone to join the party. Their music ranged from lively rock dances to smooth, seductive ballads that got people moving. The tunes spread like wildfire, making crowds dance in big circles or pair off on a whim. Dancing itself was a way for the community to blow off steam and revel. Medieval festival dances could be either wild or downright chaotic. Some performances were carefully choreographed, with folks in elaborate costumes mimicking seasonal changes or flipping social order upside down. Elsewhere, people just let loose, spinning and laughing with pure joy and excitement. Parades were another festival highlight. Floats decked out with bizarre shapes, mythical monsters, and caricatures of local bigwigs rolled through the streets. These floats were usually pulled by oxen or horses, accompanied by clowns and acrobats performing magic tricks, storytelling, and jokes. It was entertainment with a political punch, mocking the absurdity of authority while celebrating community identity. In towns like Venice, carnival music and dance hit legendary status. Masquerade balls and public shows blurred lines between classes, genders, and even reality itself. Partygoers could completely reinvent themselves. Nobles waltzed with servants. Imagine the scandal. Men dressed as women flirted with strangers. And the city's canals echoed with laughter and song deep into the night. But Carnival's music and dance meant more than just fun. They had a near spiritual significance. They symbolized renewal and transformation, wiping away old grudges and promising fresh starts as brutal winter gave way to spring. And Lent bowed out for Easter. Despite occasional grumbles from the moral police about the festival's excesses, music and dancing remained the heart and soul of Carnival's lasting appeal. They were the heartbeat of a festival celebrating life's contradictions, order and chaos, piety and pleasure, restraint and release. While Carnival was a time for laughs, music, and celebration, it was also a season ripe with violence and street chaos. Masks and costumes gave people anonymity to express their darkest desires without fear of payback. What started as playful mischief sometimes escalated into brutal confrontations. Medieval chroniclers often described drunken brawls, riots, and public disorder during Carnival. Crowds packed into narrow streets, buzzing with energy and wine, could easily turn on each other or unlucky targets they'd offended. Street fights over stolen food, insults, or ruined costumes were everyday occurrences. Sometimes these scuffles blew up into bigger conflicts involving entire neighborhoods or rival guilds. The role reversals that defined the festival could also threaten those in power. Fake kings and queens might order actions that challenged nobles or clergy. Peasants dressed as lords, flaunting power they rarely held, while usually tolerated during the festival. These antics sometimes sparked real outrage and revenge once the masks came off. Authorities struggled to keep control during Carnival. Town guards were often overwhelmed by the sheer number of revelers. Some cities imposed strict rules to limit the festival's duration or ban certain costumes and weapons. But enforcement was spotty, and officials often turned a blind eye. They knew cracking down hard on Carnival could stir up even worse unrest. So the mix of fun and danger made Carnival a unique social pressure valve. It let people vent their pent-up frustrations in a controlled setting, keeping those grievances from exploding into full-blown rebellion. Still, the line between controlled chaos and total mayhem was razor thin. Masks and costumes added mystery to the festival, but made holding individuals accountable almost impossible. This anonymity both protected and encouraged partygoers, creating a space where normal rules didn't apply. In this way, Carnival mirrored the contradictions of medieval society itself, a world of strict hierarchies and rigid norms that also understood the occasional need for upheaval and release. The chaos beneath those masks wasn't just indulgence, it was essential. That was a key part keeping communities alive and kicking year after year. When the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance and modern times, the wild spirit of costume parties started to mellow out. The Reformation and Counter-Reformation brought tighter religious control. Both secular and religious authorities cracked down on festival antics that got out of hand. What used to be chaotic pre-Lent freedom got strict supervision, tight control, and sometimes outright bans. But the parties didn't vanish. Instead, they evolved, bending to new cultural and religious realities. In places like Venice, the tradition of masked balls and elaborate parades kept going strong, more a symbol of noble prestige than community rebellion. Out in the countryside, folk customs held their ground. They kept the role reversal rituals and festivities alive, just in simpler, local flavors. Even today, echoes of medieval festivals ripple across the globe. The colorful Mardi Gras parades in New Orleans, Venice's masked carnivals, and Brazil's wild street parties all trace back to those medieval roots. The idea of a pre-Lent blowout, a burst of color, noise, and freedom before solemn fasting still thrives. Carnival's legacy continues in art and literature, from biting Renaissance plays to modern political cartoons. Mocking power and embracing madness keeps inspiring us. Masks, music, and the notion that society's rules can be bent or broken for a while remind us of our shared humanity and the need to let loose. Carnival teaches us about the delicate dance between order and chaos, how society manages tension, vents frustration, and reinvents itself through ritual rebellion. Back in the Middle Ages, a costume party wasn't just a party. It was a social pressure valve, a celebration of life's contradictions, and a sneak peek at a topsy-turvy world. So next time you see a masked ball, a lively parade, or hear the call to have fun, remember, you're witnessing a tradition forged over centuries, born from humanity's push and pull between restraint and release, a legacy born from masked partygoers daring to mock kings, dance with fools, and drink themselves silly before Lent's sober grip kicked in.